Okay, so good morning, everyone. I hope you are doing great. Okay, so let's get started with today's class. So far in the last class, we have discussed about link analysis. We have discussed about the page rank, how the determine the quality of the pages depends on how it is linked to probably other pages and so on. So in today's class, we are going to discuss about crawling and duplicate pages and their effect on and probably their need of for an efficient information retrieval system. So okay, so today we are going to cover web crawling, and if probably the time permits, then probably we can go for duplicate or probably the near duplicate detection. So before we go for web crawling, so can anybody visualize why do we need web crawling for information retrieval? Anyone? Anyone?
So to detect relevant pages and also like for page rank, we sort of need that in-link and outlink information to rank the pages. So we can do that only through a crawler. Like we need to collect that information.
Exactly. Right. Anything else? Anyone? Anyone want to add anything? Himanshu, you want to say something? Have you done any crawling before? I mean, have you done any web crawling? Anyone? Not even part of this. I mean, the course in your project. You
Yes, so
need to
like
do any
from
crawling or so?
from Khan Academy to collect the data, video transcription.
Okay, very nice. So in a way, I mean, in order to build your whatever the project you are working on, so how you are going to use Khan Academy data videos?
So we are going to use the video transcripts to classify them to hierarchical categories, like so that when new content comes in, they can be automatically categorized and it helps in content curation and organization.
Okay, fair enough. So in a way, I mean, you can see regarding the web crawling how it is related to this. So can you think of web crawling in context of search engine? Anyone? Does search engine need to do any web crawling in order to perform the information retrieval for you?
So I think
Okay.
like pages are crawled and indexed
Exactly.
previously.
Exactly. You need to get that data first. You need to index them. And you need to probably do some of the pre-processing. You need to do a number of things, right? And in a way, I mean, in that case, you need to have the data. You need to index that. You need to probably do a lot of pre-processing in order to provide an efficient information retrieval system, right? And what is the impact of I mean, probably why do we need to determine the near duplicate or probably duplicate pages? What impact does it have on the information retrieval?
So like if we evaluate only recall, then the system could just return like duplicate entries and we could like get a very high relevance. But actually like it is displeasing for the user, it's frustrating. So we have to like
Mhm.
return diverse results and not just
Right.
closely related stuff just because it's relevant.
So this is you are referring, you can say with reference to user. How about with reference to the search engine itself. I mean, does it have any impact on the performance? Does it have any impact on, you can say, the waste of resources?
Just like computationally, we can compute relevance scores only for like unique documents rather
Exactly,
than for every
exactly,
combination.
exactly. Because before the search engine provide you the list of document for your query, I mean, it does a lot of things, right? So as we have discussed, it needs to do the indexing, it needs to do pre-processing, it needs to do probably uh, compute the different score, be it page rank, and all those stuff, right? So in a way it needs a lot of processing. So if we somehow determine these pages in the beginning itself, or probably we index only those pages which are non-duplicate, which are probably unique, which are probably significantly different from whatever the pages that we already have. So in a way, I mean, you are able to provide a good, and since you don't have the duplicate pages indexed with your database, so whenever you get any query, you are only giving the probably the unique or probably the useful documents to the user, right? So in a way, you can help in both ways, not only to the user but also to the search company itself, by removing the near or probably the duplicate pages. Which one is easier to do? Just detecting the duplicate pages or detecting the near duplicate pages? Which one is, do you think, is easier to do?
Sir, exact duplicate is much easier to do.
And how you can do so?
Uh, sir, so basically, like if we have like a, so there could be two things. Like basically, sometimes approximation may be easier, but when we have a large collection, like exact duplicate detection is tough, and in those
Mhm.
cases, near duplicate is easy. But when we have a smaller collection, probably exact duplicate is like easier, because like we can compare the documents easily. So I think it depends on the collection size.
Right. So rather than comparing two documents, can we speed up this process? Can we can we do it faster? So how about, I mean, creating some fingerprinting? How about creating some hash so that basically it gives you probably very faster comparison, or you can say whether the two pages are equivalent or not, right? So definitely I agree with you. The detecting the duplicate pages is very easy, not very easy, at least as compared to near duplicate is easy. What are the challenges that you can see in the near duplicate detection? I mean, definitely we'll go into more details when we complete the remaining lecture, but I just want to probably know your thoughts. What are the challenges will be there in case of near duplicate detection?
So we are approximating when hashing, so there is like a high chance for false positives and false negatives, and like it is difficult to balance that because we have to choose a certain family of hash functions such that it is satisfied,
Exactly,
which is like in itself a huge search problem.
exactly. Because many times, I mean, if you do a very little change in the data, for example, for a given article, I just change the date when it was published. It may lead you to probably significant change in the hashing, right? So despite the hash indicate that both are very different pages, but in fact they are not. I mean, you might have just changed the date, like, or probably edited the date, like, or I don't know. I mean, you may have probably just corrected some grammatical sentence and so, right? So in a way, definitely the near duplicate is bit difficult as compared to the simple exact duplicate detection. So that we'll be discussing probably more details in the later slides of the class. Okay, so at least now we have uh, uh, a kind of understanding why do we need to have web crawling, why we need to determine the near or probably the exact duplicate pages in a way. Any idea on the web usually how much data is a kind of duplicate or near duplicate? Any guess? So nearly the 40% data on the web is kind of duplicate. So that's why, I mean, at least you can see, I mean, if you're able to reduce this 40-50% of the data which are near duplicate or probably duplicate, you are going to reduce your task. At least search engine is going to reduce their task by half, right? Or you can say their cost by half, right? Or you can also think they are going to improve the performance twice, right? Because they are going to ignore these pages, and in a way, I mean, it is going to help you in overall information retrieval, this system that you are providing to the user. Okay, so basic crawler operation. So how does it work? So basically, we begin with some kind of seed URLs, just like when you don't know where to start with, right? Because given that the web is kind of wild, right? It is very, very huge. And if search engine has to start from somewhere, right? They need to start with some kind of seed URL, and very similar you can say the concept has been used whenever you do other kind of crawling from the web data, right? So so it, in a way, it start with some seed URL. So for example, we may start with triple ITD, right? And we keep expanding our URL that we'll be looking for by what you can do. So what, suppose we start with triple ITD URL as a seed. Sorry. So we fetch and parse them, right? Suppose once we get the seed URL, so we fetch and parse them. So in a way, after fetching that, you get the page. And how usually you get the page? Anyone? If you have to get a web page through command prompt, how do you get it? How do you download a page? wget, right? Very nice. So in a way, suppose you get the page. Once you get the page, you extract the URL zip point to. So definitely when you parse them, you'll get some text, right? So once you have the seed URL, for example, triple IT, you fetch and parse them, you'll get some text. So how this text will be useful in the search engine? So they will be used in indexing, right? They will be used in probably doing all the pre-processing and probably other stuff. So especially indexing, right? And what are the other things you will get it apart from text content? You may get some URLs, right? For example, on the triple IT web page, they may have other URLs, probably the URLs to say FICCI. Recently, for example, yesterday, there was a post, FICCI has given triple IT as an excellence in faculty, right? Something like that. So it's given the other URL FICCI, and probably triple ITD website may have other URLs which basically say news URL. So for example, triple ITD has a center of, say, for example, something. So that may have some government websites, some government I mean the URLs of the government websites, or probably it may have the URLs of some URLs of some news channel, right? For example, there are some news on NDTV, or probably something else, some other news channel. They have covered a story because the triple ITD are built something this for the society, right? So in a way, it's kind of recursive process. You start with a seed, you have the URL, fetch the page, parse them, take the yeah, get the content, and once you have the content, you can index them, and from the URL you keep getting URLs. In a way, you are adding more URLs in your seed, and you continuously adding and probably getting the page and so on. So in a way, you can fetch each URL on the queue. You are adding basically all these URLs in a queue. So in a way, earlier queue only had your seed URL. Now it keep adding other URLs that they are pointing to, that they are having. In a way, this queue will be keep expanding, and every time you need to fetch URL from the queue and repeat the process. In a way, in this way, you can keep uh, doing basically the scrolling process, as we have just learned. As we have just learned uh, that near duplicate or probably the duplicate URL, not URLs, probably the web page is something we need to get rid of. So you need to do, I mean, a lot of pre-processing here whenever you are going through these URLs and probably processing them accordingly. You can do a lot of a lot of processing here and take a call whether a new URL should be added or not. Whether, for example, as we have given example from here, you have triple ITD as a seed URL, and from there probably you got some government or probably some news channel, and once you added this URL here, these URLs may point to some other URLs as well. For example, one of news channel may have the URL of triple ITD, but you already have that URL in your queue, right? So you do not need to add that because you already have seen that, or probably that URL may already have been in the queue. So these things you need to keep this in mind uh, when we do some crawling. It's a very basic kind of recursive process that we need to follow. And in order to check the quality, in order to remove the duplicates, we can do extra work here to do. So in the further slides, we'll be going into more details. What are the checks? What are the things we need to do? So before I go further, I would like to know from you guys, if you have to build a crawler, what are the things you need to keep in mind? So definitely one point that we have discussed about near duplicates. So what else you need to do? So for example, here from the seed URL, we have added say 10 URLs in the queue. What all URLs we need to process, in which order? Anyone? At what rate? Anyone? Do we need to consider these things? Yeah, Pradeep.
Yes, sir, because it might happen that there is a URL which is pointed by many other web pages. So in that particular case, we need to consider that particular URL which is pointed by many others.
So in a way, you are indicating that the URL, or you can say the page, which having the high priority or probably the high importance, should
Yes,
be
sir.
crawled first as compared to the URL which probably.
Yes, sir, because on a web page, on a web page, it might happen that there are some URLs which are very common, like very common, or we need to consider the one which is like very rare also, because every URL, every page refers to Facebook, every page refers to Google, but it might happen that there is a page which is only pointing to Triple IT Delhi.
Exactly.
So in that case, rarity also one factor which is we need to consider.
So in a way, I mean, again, so we can go into more details how the importance you can divide, but in general, we are in agreement that if some page has high importance, it need to be probably crawled first, right? At what rate we need to crawl? Any guess? Should we continuously keep crawling the pages? Because suppose you have a queue here, right? In your queue, for example, you have 10 or probably 100 or probably 1 million pages to queue. Should we just start queuing everything, or do we need to follow some mechanism? And do we need to keep something in mind while doing the crawling of these 1 million pages in the queue? Anyone? I mean, we'll go into more details. I just, before making you biased, I want to know your just thought that you may solve, you can say, in a brute force way.
Sir, I think this queue is not like a simple queue which is like following first come first serve. It is going to be a priority queue which is going to prioritize the web pages. On that basis, we need to fetch.
Yeah, that's nice. And about the rate, or probably at what rate we need to crawl? Should we just simply, for example, we have 1 million documents or probably the web pages in our list queue. Should we just do everything we should in parallel, or what are the things we should do or you will do? Anyone? Oshin?
So basically,
yeah.
So basically, like we do not also want to like load the system, so we could like in the queuing mechanism itself, like if a particular URL fails or something, like we could put back into a queue like backup and then maybe again try later. So rather than wasting resources on pinging a single URL continuously.
Mm-hmm.
So that is like commonly how all this like big companies do, like sort of also rate limiting, like we say that only so many URLs can be done like per minute. So even if like
So
more,
what will happen? What will happen if the request or probably the crawling of these pages will go beyond that rate? What will happen?
so basically like they could be queued and like basically from the queue we could read like 36 at a time and fetch download those pages. Like I mean we could read the URLs and instead of immediately downloading those pages, we could just queue them and do 36 at a time.
So
Uh,
have you heard of error code 500?
yes.
What is that?
So basically like there's some internal server error like on the
Mm-hmm.
site.
Yeah, yeah. So in a way, I mean, often it also happens like internal server error because the server is getting so many requests that it cannot handle. So often you might have seen if I don't know if you have tried, if often some website probably built, for example, built by NIC, right? NIC built some government websites and now a job opening came, for example, a railway job recruitment. I mean, when such form opens, right, you might have seen when the people or probably the aspirants started filling this form, they keep getting kind of like pages not available, services not available, because the computational resources or probably the instances, or you can say the number of instances that you have for the web page, or probably the, because whenever you set up some page, you know, you set all those resources like how many requests it can support, what and how many requests it can put in the queue and all those stuff. If it is go beyond its limit, it is going to be say, I mean, okay, so service is not available, right? So that's why often and basically that's why often different web pages, different web pages basically set up something, okay, so you cannot crawl my page at least more than this rate, because if you're going to crawl their page in a way, it's a hit on their website, right? Since it's a hit on a website, in a way it is also going to cost the companies, because there are many companies, their website, especially for the e-commerce website, they pay on the demand kind of thing, right? So for example, uh, and for an e-commerce website, during the sale during the sale number of requests they are going to have is huge as compared to probably in the normal days, or probably in the weekend they may have more as compared to the in a weekdays, right? So based on that, they keep changing the how many instances they have, how many copies of their pages and all those they need to have and so on, right? So in a way, that's why they restrict it. Okay, so you cannot crawl beyond this. Can we crawl all the pages, by the way? Or uh, there are pages which probably we cannot crawl. What kind of pages you cannot crawl? Any guess?
So like copyrighted content, like first we have to like sort of examine the robots.txt. Like not all content can be like crawled or scrapped by all people. So
Mm-hmm.
we actually have to see the terms of service in the website.
Right, exactly. So in a way, we need to follow. In a way, we need to follow. And apart from this, anything else? I mean, how about static and dynamic pages? So most of the pages that we crawl, at least, I hope you can see that mostly these are the static pages we are referring to, right? Is it good to crawl dynamic pages?
So can you repeat the difference between static and dynamic? I am not able to recall.
Okay, anybody want to highlight the difference? Static pages, in a sense, I mean, once probably the page is set or created, it is not going to change very frequently. or at least in order to show the page, it does not need to do it does not need to probably do you can say the query to the database in order to respond that. So for example, dynamic pages, you can think uh, in your page there are some part which will be shown only after running a query to the database. So for example, transaction, right, or balance, something like that. A part of the page is probably not static. So for example, Wikipedia is, all these are example of static pages. Once it is created, it is not going to change very frequently. At least it doesn't need to probably do some database queries in order to show the pages, right? But in case of dynamic pages, every time it has to show the page, it needs to do some database query, to probably do some processing and then show. So for example, in some of the pages you might have heard jQuery, Java query, jQuery, something like that. So through jQueries, I mean, people run some dynamic content. Anybody want to append, I mean, augment that? Any other differences?
So, for example, like popular front-end libraries like React or so basically now the idea is to like componentize everything, and so most of them like sort of by default they are dynamic content, but then like there are some tools to like transfer them to a static markup, but still like that is a problem. Like it's difficult to index these pages created using those frameworks.
Right, right,
Though there are mechanisms, like it's not as straightforward as static
exactly.
plain old listing.
Yeah. So in a way, I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible. It's say it's very difficult as compared to the static pages. So that's why mostly the using the crawling, you are at least you are crawling the static pages or part of the dynamic pages rather than everything. So this is just a kind of overall picture you can see. So you have a web, you have the seed pages, that is you are going to start with, you have a crawler, and you have the unseen pages. So as part of the crawling, ideally you need to expand the seed pages and probably try to cover as many as unseen pages and probably as you can. So that based on probably whatever the criteria and the filters that you have, so that you can have all the important pages at least that you want to crawl, because these unseen pages may have some duplicate pages as well, so that you want to throw away, not throw away, at least you don't want to consider. Similarly, these unseen pages may have some spam pages, right, that probably, or malicious pages that you want to probably don't want to go. So in a way, what we are willing to do, so from the seed pages we get the probably the links. So these links you can so as I said, I mean, from the seed pages you probably parse it. From the parsing you get some URLs, you get some text. So using the text you can index them. Using the URLs, probably you can have additional you can add these URL to the URL frontier. So URL frontier you can think of as a queue that we are referring. So where all the queues are, all the URLs are, new URLs are added, keep adding to this URL frontier. So every time using this URL frontier, you get one URL and then get that page again. So once you have that page again, right? So you parse them. After parsing, using the text, you can again index them. And using the new URL, you can keep adding to this URL frontier. So in a way, URL frontier is probably you'll be having a queue, having all the URL that you have to crawl based on the different criteria that we'll be running. So like remove the duplicate page, remove the pages which are malicious and so on. So in a way, we are doing this recursive process throughout this and keep adding the URL here. Since you are doing a recursive process, what can happen?
Sir, there is a possibility of infinite loops, like there is a cycle in which this might goes, or there is a possibility of like overflow of the memory.
Right. Very nice. So when you can go into infinite loop, like you're referring to one page that probably refers to another page. You're referring to another page that again refer back to you and so on, right? So in a way, you may stuck to some infinite loop and probably, or you can also think of it like, right? So you are referring to one page, that page refer to another page. In fact, that page is near duplicate of another, I mean, the page that you already have. And again, that refers to another page that is probably again near duplicates page that you have. Because there are many websites, which are, you can say, kind of put you in some recursive loop just to get the hits on the different pages they have. So for example, you might have tried downloading some songs, right? Sometimes of a movie, or probably, right? So while downloading movie or probably song or software, you might have seen it keep asking you, okay, so click this link, and then you go to probably another link, and then you click another link, and it keep going on, and that still you're not able to download, right? And there are sometimes there may be some bugs in the website itself, right? Because often what we do copy paste and change the URL letter, but for example, the person may forgotten that or something. So in a way, I mean, all these handling need to be done while adding a new URL to the URL frontier, and once you have the different URLs in the URL frontier, you can get one URL and probably keep crawling and expanding towards the unseen wave that you have, and keep adding the different URL or probably the crawled pages in your list. Any questions so far here? Okay, so I believe it's not. So simple picture is a kind of web crawling is not feasible with one machine, because all the above steps are kind of distributed, right? Again, so you don't have capability to process everything in just one machine, right? So we have given the example of malicious page, so that may have kind of spam pages, so that you need to get rid of. So even some non-malicious pages pose challenges, like as I said, there may be some duplicate pages. It might be some pages are very remote server, so that's why the latency and probably the bandwidth would be quite high, that you want to probably put in probably in the low priority if you want. So webmaster stipulation, so kind of how deep you should crawl a website, a URL hierarchy. So for example, once you get the triple ITD, so how deep you need to go. So for example, triple ITD has different departments probably have a different center may have probably so different people and all those. So how deep you need to go, how deep you need to crawl a URLs hierarchy and doing so. So that is something you need to consider while doing a crawling. So one key thing that you need to keep in mind while doing politeness. So why the crawler need to be polite? Any guess? We have given some reasoning, right? Because if you hit to server too often, it might be the case the server will go out of service, or probably it is not going to probably the server is going to be unresponsive, or probably it is not going to handle the these number of requests that you're putting in, right? So that's why you need to be one of the key, or you can say the must criteria, one of the must criteria of having any crawler is that your crawler should be polite, right? So often you might have has anyone do any kind of crawling, and how do you insert the politeness in your code? Anyone? How can you add the politeness in your code so that you don't hit server too often?
So we may add
Time.
delays also, like
Exactly.
script
So you
called
usually
for.
people call add sleep, right? Sleep 10 millisecond or 1 second and so on. And because if you may have crawl data from Twitter or probably website like Foursquare and all those, right? If they find that you keep crawling, keep making hits so frequently, they ban you. Have you faced that issue? That's why you need to make a call at the given rate, so that they don't basically ban you, right? So that's why people often add sleep in between two consecutive requests, right? So just keep that in mind. You need to add politeness because firstly, it may be an hazardous for the website itself. That's why they put some rate limit. And also, it's a very basic thing, right? You need to call, you need to basically call in such a way that you don't bother other website. You don't bother probably, the pages that you want to crawl. So what any crawler must do? So one is the robust. It should be immune to the spider traps, because I given the example, right? So where basically you may stuck in some infinite loop. So it should be immune to some spider traps and other malicious behavior from the web server. So that is one of the must do if you are building any crawler. Second is the politeness, which I have just referred. So it respect the implicit and explicit politeness consideration, right? Can anybody guess what is implicit and explicit politeness here? Okay, so explicit politeness is specification from the webmasters on what portion of the site can be crawled. So it has explicitly mentioned, okay, so from this my website, you can crawl this part, you cannot crawl this part. So that is the explicit politeness. Anybody aware of explicit politeness? So one is something called robot.txt. Anybody aware of what this robots.txt?
So it mentions like which paths can be scrapped, like on a
Exactly,
website.
exactly. So what you do on your website, you put a file called robot.txt, which is publicly available, and where you can specify which part of the website, which path is accessible, which are not. So let me give you the example. So this is one of the example of, in fact, this is the robot.txt. So here what it does, it has two parts. One is the user agent, like what part you are allowing to user, and what path you are disallowing to user. So like star means here selects applicable to all robots, like every user. And disallow, so here is the path that you are saying that it is not visible or not accessible to anyone. So for example, in this case, the user agent star means this section applies to all robot. Disallow slash it means, so tells the robot that it should not visit any pages on this website further, right? So this is the example where you are kind of stopping everyone or asking everyone to not crawl anything from the website. How about this? So here you are disallowing some specific paths, like what you're saying, you are allowing all the robots, okay, to disallow this path. I mean slash CGI bin, or probably the temp, or probably the Joe, your home folder, and so on. So these three directories are excluded. Similarly here, can anybody tell me what this mean here? So basically it allow all robots complete access, because star, it means you are allowing all user. In disallow, you have not given any path. It means like empty. It means like, okay, so you allow all robots to do. What does this mean, anyone?
So it's just allowing a single robot from Google.
Right. It means it's only allowing the Google. For rest, they are not allowing. Right. So kind of allow Google do anything, but all other agent you disallow, like you cannot access anything, and so on. So it's kind of, I mean, the people started following as a standard. They put this. So basically, and it's kind of originally 1994 standard for robot exclusion document, and later on 1997 internet draft. So basically, they put a kind of methods and so on. So in a way that this is the example of explicit politeness, like specification from the webmaster, the web owner itself on what portion of the sites can be crawled. Second is the implicit politeness. So even with no specification, so for example, if even though someone has not mentioned robot.txt, they haven't put anything on the robot.txt, something is implicit to you, right? Because if you keep adding anyone's website, again it may go down, and secondly it will basically waste of your resources as well, because you think that if I make so many requests, so for example that's what we do at so for example during the Tatkal ticket booking, right? So you keep doing very frequently, so that you are the one upon job application filling, you are keep putting up, I mean keep accessing the page, so that you think you are the first one, probably fill it, otherwise I mean you're not able to. And probably you are, often it happens like today is the deadline for filling the application, and you don't want to wait, right? Because you have a fear like today is the deadline, if I don't do today, I mean I will miss the opportunity, right? So in a way that is not only creating issue for the website but also for you, and so on. So that's why there should be avoid, and what general thing we follow, ideally say okay thodi der wait kar lo fir karo, I mean let's wait for some time. So that's something you should do. So even implicit politeness refers to even with no specification, despite not mentioned there, avoid hitting any site too often. So there should be some gap, between two requests, and again that depends on the website, that depends on the application, and so can you give me two websites, can you tell me two websites? For one I should probably not hit too frequently, and for another website probably I need to hit too frequently. Can you example of website, two example websites where I need to probably hit frequently and where we should not? Any guess?
So Wikipedia, for example, you are reading a page on Wikipedia, you just hit the link and just start reading the page. But for the site where you are hitting like regularly is, let's say Facebook, you are liking the photos, you are like going to other pages, you are like continuously interacting with the web pages. So these are the examples.
Okay. Another thing you can think of like news channel, right? Because they keep updating us. For example, stock website, right? They keep changing data very frequently, right? I mean because it is the nature, right? So you need to hit it very frequently, right, in order to have the latest information. Because if you don't hit, you don't crawl, what will happen? You will have the stale information, and once you have the stale information, what will happen? You will be providing the wrong information to your user, which is not good. So that's why, for example, a website, for example, Make My Trip, right? They need to continuously crawl the data web pages from the airline website, so that they have the latest information with them. Often have you seen the cases when you are booking an airline ticket through a Make My Trip, you booked everything, okay, so you see, I mean in fact that happened with me day before yesterday. One of my relative was coming to Delhi from Mumbai. I was very happy. Okay, so the price is just 3,200. Okay, Air India 3,200, great. I started booking, filled all the details, click the payment. When I click the payment, it says, okay, so fare has changed. And they made it to 4,600, right? Have you suffered this? And why did this happen? Anyone?
So it's probably because of the dynamic pricing. So when initially when you clicked on when you were actually filling the form, someone else might have booked another seat. And let's say earlier when you had initially clicked the form, let's say there were 5 or 10 seats available. And as the time progressed and when you were filling the form, the seats got and so the number got decreased, and initially whatever price that was there was not present, as there were more customers and the pricing was dynamic. So let's say by the time you checked, you were about to check out, the seats that were available were let's say one or two. So
Right, right,
that's why there's a price change.
right. So in a way, you can see the Make My Trip basically had the sale page, old information, right? So
Yes.
because, so that's why they need to, that's why whenever the transaction is involved, they often check it back again. So it's kind of they doing a kind of crawling again to the actual website. Okay, so this is the information I've shown earlier, but now since we are booking it, since we are doing the payment, let's check it again. And that's how probably you can say now the priority of this crawling is high as compared to anything else which is happening on the website. So for example, if a user which is probably clicking a payment should be given, I mean, this request should be given higher priority as compared to the person who just probably just open the Make My Trip web page or something, right? So robot.txt, which I was referring earlier. So for a server, you can create a file robot.txt. You can specify all the access restriction there, and accordingly, probably the ethical crawler need to follow this, right? So when I say the ethical crawler, why do we need to mention that? Because if there is a kind of hacker or something, right? So they don't bother about what is mentioned there, because their purpose is not to follow what is mentioned there. Their purpose is basically just break the things, right? So these are the example we have already covered, right? So kind of what does this mean? Anyone?
So all agents are not allowed to that particular path,
Exactly,
but a search engine like Google alone is allowed to all paths.
exactly, exactly. So finally, so last 2 points we discussed what a crawler must do. So one is it should be robust, and second is it should be polite. So this is must. I mean, any crawler must follow these two. What are should be? So these are should be, you can say the criteria or the guideline. It should be capable of distributed operations. It should be designed to run on multiple distributed machines. Why? Because you cannot handle everything on one machine. It should be scalable because it is designed to increase the crawl rate by adding more machines. So it should be scalable, right? If our scholars should be in such a way, because if you want to increase the crawling rate, right? So we basically add more machines. So it should be scalable to that. Performance and efficiency, like it should permit full use of available processing and networking resources. So for example, if you have 10 machines, then all 10 machines should be continuously crawling, right? Again, when I say the continuously crawling, it should crawl in such a way that it should follow the politeness. So again, we discussed later how you can introduce the politeness while achieving the high performance and high efficiency. We should only probably face the high quality pages first, right? Or higher quality pages first, because the higher quality pages are something any user is more interested in. It is a kind of continuous operation, so continue fetching the fresh copies of the previously fetched page, because as I said, we have given example of airline booking, right? Or probably you can think of some news website. On the news website, new news keep coming, right? So despite you have crawled the page probably just say 10 minutes earlier, or probably 1 day earlier, or say 1 hour earlier, you need to crawl it again, because in last 1 hour many news has appeared, and so on. And finally, it should be extensible. So extensible in a way, because different uh, you might have seen, right? You might have seen. Have anyone crawled from the Facebook? Anyone? Have anyone used Selenium?
Yes.
So what are the issues that you face in while crawling through Selenium?
So the tags like might differ. Uh, so like basically like when crawling a page, like people generally use class names or some unique identifiers which are
Mhm.
subject to change. So like that is one of the primary problems.
Mm. Yeah, and also, I mean, uh, often basically when you build a crawler, so that is specific to the page, right? Okay, or probably the format, even the protocol. But over the time, I mean, you might encounter new data, new format, or probably even sometime new protocol, right? So that is something, I mean, your crawler should be robust with, extensible, and so on. So by the way, Selenium is one of those who don't know can search about Selenium. Selenium is a kind of crawler, or often people use it for crawling the pages which don't allow crawling. So for example, can you crawl Facebook pages, by the way? For example, I want to crawl all the posts of Venkatesh. Can I do so? Do Facebook allow me to do so?
No,
Anyone?
sir. No, sir. It will not allow because it will be a breach to the privacy of a person.
Mhm. And but still I want to crawl. For example, political parties, right? Political parties, despite it is not allowed, but they want to know what is happening on Pradeep's wall, what is happening on Venkatesh's wall, how I can convince Pradeep to probably vote for me.
So using Selenium, like
Exactly.
basically in a sandbox, like it can open the browser and
Exactly.
access a particular tag and take its text content.
Exactly. So those who are not aware, so they can search about Selenium. So what they can do, so using a Selenium basically, and also Selenium will be useful to the places where uh, they say, okay, they expect only the real users are allowed. So it will simulate like a real user. It will open your web page. It will scroll down, up, select different part of it, and all those stuff it can do, right? So you can check more about that if you're interested. So now you can see uh, your overall crawling picture has updated. So how it was earlier working. So now you have the crawling thread. So that is keep adding the URLs to your front URL frontier, and now you are doing in parallel because you make it more distributed. Earlier there was only one kind of machine, a node. So now you have multiple machines crawling in a kind of distributed manner. And since now you have the more crawlers, or you can say the distributed system, it also need to basically coordinate with whatever the URL you are adding here, URL frontier. So like when you are adding a new, for example, if this particular crawler or thread, URL crawling thread, adding a new URL to the URL frontier, what it does, it will check all the URLs added there in this URL frontier, irrespective of which URL thread it is, which machine it is, to see if that particular URL is already crawled or not, or whether if it is not crawled, then whether it is there in the URL frontier or not. And accordingly, if it is duplicate, if it is already there, you can ignore, and accordingly you can see. So in a way, you can continuously update the your crawling strategies. Any questions so far? Okay, so I believe not. So URL frontier, what is URL frontier? As I said, it basically include multiple pages from the same host. It must avoid try fetching them all at the same time, because if you are going to fetch all the pages at the same time, in a way you are, which criteria you are writing here? If you are going to fetch all of them all at the same time, for example, from the same website, which criteria you are violating here?
Implicit
politeness, right? So that is something, and since it's a must criteria, you need to be bit careful. So it's kind of way your URL frontier should work in such a way that it should implement the politeness. Definitely it should be robust, but it should be also implement the politeness there. So and since should criteria is like it should be performance wise, it should be good and all those stuff. So it must try to keep all crawling threads busy and so on. So how the processing steps in the QRL? Now pick a URL, right? Pick a URL from the frontier. So since in the URL frontier you have so many URLs, which one to choose? So you need to think about what criteria. So you need to think about some kind of priority, right? So based on some priority and which also not violate the politeness, and accordingly you can fetch the document at the URL whichever selected, paste the URL, extract the link again. So once you have this, text will be used for indexing and probably the URLs will be added to the URL frontier again. So check if the URL content has already seen. So if not, add to the index. If it is, then you can ignore. So for each extracted URL, ensure that it passes certain URL filter check. So what kind of filter you can put? So for example, I'm only interested in the websites in India, like .in. So you can do so. Similarly, for example, you only want to crawl .edu websites. So you can only crawl .edu and definitely obey the rules mentioned in the robots.txt that we have just covered earlier. And it also basically check for the duplicacy, which I mentioned. So check if the already there in the frontier. If it is already there in the frontier, you do not need to basically crawl that. So this is the basic crawl architecture work. So you have the www, you fetch the page, and once you have the fetch the page, you can add the URL to the URL frontier. And whenever the URL now, once you want to crawl the page, right? So for a given URL, what is the first thing you find? If you have a URL, how you get the data for that URL? You need to get the IP address of the server where this page has been there, right? So in a way, you need to use the DNS. What is the full form of DNS? Anyone?
Domain name
The
server.
domain server.
Yeah. So domain name server basically help you to find the IP address of the server where these pages are hosted, right? And using that, you can get the page. So once you get the page, you can parse it. Once you parse it, you need to check the different thing, right? So whether the content is seen or not, right? If it is not seen, then probably you index it on all those stuff you do. If it is already seen, then probably you need to ignore that. So after passing, probably content is for example not seen. Now what the next thing you do, you need to check the robot filter. Okay, so what are the pages are allowed, which are not, and accordingly you can do the URL filter. Once you have the URL filter, as I said, you need to remove the duplicate URLs and so on. What are the URLs that you already crawled? What are the URLs you are going to already in the, you can say the URL frontier list. In this way, I mean, probably if this is not, then you can add the URL to URL frontier, and this process keep going on, right? So this process keep going on. You keep adding URL to the URL frontier. You keep getting the URLs from the URL frontier. Perform the DNS, and once you resolve the domain names, then probably you get the page and parse it, and this process, recursive process, will keep going on. Is this clear? Anyone? Any doubts? Anyone? Okay, so I believe this basic crawl structure is clear. So DNS, as I was referring to, it's a kind of lookup service on the internet. So it's given a URL, it retrieves its IP address. So service provided by the distributed set of server, thus you can say lookup latencies can be high, even seconds. So that is something you need to fasten it, because given that the search engine has to crawl at very high rate, how you can reduce this? So solution could be, how about you can have DNS caching, because if the some caching, right? So since some pages are kind of very frequently or you are interested in, so in that case you can cache them, right? So really the batch DNS resolver, something which collect requests and send them out together, because overall it takes time. So if you can send in the batches, I think it will save the time. And similarly, parsing URL normalization. So often happens that when suppose you are parsing some web page or document, you see some relative URL. So for example, this is the page you are referring to. So on this page, you have a relative link /wiki/Wikipedia general disclaimer. So ideally, if you open this link, it won't work, right? Because it is relative. So you need to add the base URL to it. So what ideally this means that uh, uh, englishwikipedia.org and then Wikipedia general disclaimer and so on. So basically this part of the relative link that you have, you need to add in the base URL and get it. So this need to be done in the normalization. In the crawling, this is one of the basic URL normalization that we do. So content seam that we were referring to is like whether the page is duplicate, or if the page is just is already there in the index, or do not, if there is already in the index, then you not need to process it, right? And in this is something, I mean, we will be covering. So since we are running out of time today, probably we can stop here. And any questions so far? And we will cover the remaining slide in the next class. Any questions on whatever the content we have covered? Okay, so golden rule of 10 seconds, there is no question. It means everything is good. Okay, so who will be presenting today?
So group 23.
DP.
Sorry, Himanshi Mathur, give her the
Okay, so Himanshi Mathur, I made you co-host. Please share your screen. And next group. So before we present, how many groups are presenting today? So Himanshi and who else?
Sir, group number 29.
What's name? Akshit?
Akshit, yes, sir.
So Akshit, I made you co-host. Is the only these two groups are there?
No, sir. Myself, Tarun. I'll be presenting.
Tarun. Okay, so wait a second. So Tarun, since there are 3 groups, and in order to make everything in time, I want to show something. So let me share something. Could you please stop sharing?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just give me a second. Okay, so since we have 3 groups, we do not have much time. I quickly want to show one thing.
7 minutes.
Can you hear? I guess not.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, if you can hear, then it's good. So come on, everyone. So you have just 7 or I mean, kind of 10 minutes at least. So please don't go beyond 10 minutes. Otherwise, it will be always happens like we go probably 10:45 or sometime 11, which is difficult for many. So I can see many pictures here as well. So nice. Okay, so please be in time. Thanks. Don't go beyond 10 minutes. Thanks.
Yes. So, sir, I'll just take 10 seconds extra from probably the 10 minutes time. So, like, I want to ask everybody, can you relate what is common amongst all these movies? Like, we have Harry Potter, we have Dil Bechara, we have Three Idiots, we have Twilight. Come on, guys, like, at least the Potterheads can give me an answer over here. Can you relate anything? What is common amongst all these movies?
They're all based on books.
Oh, okay. So we didn't expect the first answer to be correct. That's great. Okay.
Based on novels.
Yeah. So therefore, all as said by Anjali, all these movies are based on novels. Therefore, we present to you a very unique idea, Narflix, bringing novels to life. So the idea is to generate movies based on novels. So the system would input any novel and output a full-fledged movie. Now, before diving deep into the technicalities, let us first try to understand that why do we even care about this idea? Like, why is it important? So, first of all, as per a survey conducted, more than 60% of people prefer to watch movies rather than reading books. Apart from that, if we think about our time as a kid, we used to love like the stories and everything. We used to almost hear them like every week or so. So think about, you'll have animated versions of the stories that you, hundreds of stories that you used to love as a kid. Apart from that, it has some economic benefits as well, because it is clearly seen that the movies which are based on novels have more usually gain more profit and also gain more popularity as compared to the original screenplays. So therefore, it is clearly seen that people are interested in watching movies more. So the closest existing system that we could found related to our project was Benjamin. So in Benjamin, it is not exactly quite the same, but yes, it gives you movie scripts. It is an AI based model that gives you the movie scripts, and it is trained on the multiple movies scripts from 1980s to 1990s. Okay. Apart from that, I think one of the movies that is based on this idea, Benjamin idea, is Sunspring. And we have pasted the YouTube link on chat as well if somebody wants to explore it a bit more.
The described system has its own limitations. One of the major limitations was that the dialogues generated by the script were quite bizarre and were not coherent. In fact, listening to those dialogues actually seemed hilarious because we could not make sense out of what they were trying to say. Here are some of the YouTube comments, as we can see, that was posted on the video. Another drawback of this system was that it was a very short script generated, and that was just for 9 minutes, and thus such movies cannot be released in a theater. The novelty that we bring forward is that we propose a one-of-a-kind idea where we will generate a full-length movie out of a defined novel and not just a random screenplay. Now, since the movie is based on a book, the plot would obviously be coherent and thus meaningful. Also, the generation of the character animations and audio would be done by our system itself automatically and would not require human intervention. So we divide the steps of building our system broadly into three categories: G, M, and O, that is generating, mapping, and ordering. We will generate the characters, scenes, and dialogues. Then we will map the dialogues to characters and the dialogues and characters to scenes. Then finally, we will order the dialogues and scenes to get our movie. Diving deep into the steps in detail, we first extract and divide the novel into major sections that can form scenes in the movie. And now for each scene, we will identify the characters involved in it. We'll extract the dialogues of each character. Now in the novel, the dialogues are either given directly in the form of when they're enclosed within quotes, or if it's a play script, they're given after colons. But most of the times novels describe conversations between characters not with explicit dialogues, but instead they just give paragraphs. So we'll extract such dialogues as well and map them to the characters. Then we'll identify the setting of the scene with all the objects. We'll identify the locations of each character in the scene. We'll identify the outfits and color mapping with the background. We'll identify the emotions and interactions between the characters. We'll finally generate the voice and adjust the volumes accordingly. We finally animate the characters to speak, act, and interact. Once all these scenes have been generated, we just order them and make sure that coherence is there between the scenes, and we have gotten our final movie.
Vanshika, are you here? I guess there's some issue at her end. I'll continue. Okay, so let's discuss the feasibility of the proposed plan. Now, in short-term goal, we intend to generate the script and the characters. For generating the script, we will need to have the dialogues and the scenes. Some way of identifying the dialogues were discussed by DP just now, like text cues. Apart from that, we can use part of speech tagging to identify the key phrases which can form the dialogues. Then we can also use techniques like named entity recognition to identify the key characters and map the dialogues just generated to them. We can use lexical databases to have a semantic sense to the dialogues generated. Next, please. Once we have the dialogues and the scenes extracted out, we would need to time sequence them. Models such as GAN can be used for time sequencing the different scenes and dialogues. Also, one of the evaluation metric that we can use throughout the generation process is summarization. What we can do is summarize the novel text and the generated script or the generated scene and see if both of them are conveying the same extract. If they are pretty similar, that means the work has been done to quite a good extent. Next. Then for identifying the characters, we need to have their soft and physical skills being charted out. To identify some physical skills like height, weight, or softer skills like politeness, etc., they can be inferred at times directly from the text, but if some of them are missing, we can try to use some deep learning models trained on usual characteristics of characters from movies like, say, Frozen or Jungle Book, etc., and then extrapolate them for the missing characteristics. Then we can train an AI model over softwares like iClone 5 or Blender to generate the characters in an automated fashion. Next. In midterm goal, we intend to generate the dialogues and video. So after the midterm, we would have a complete working movie ready to go to theater. For dialogues, one thing that we can use is text-to-speech software, where to add the human touch, IBM Watson TTS technology can be used. Then for video rendition, we can use certain databases of lip movements already curated, and then we can do a proper Visime construction as per a technique discussed early on in the class. Next. Now, there are also certain inanimate objects making sounds like vehicles, footsteps, etc. For these, we first need to identify them, and then once these have been identified, what we can do is use tools like Adobe Audition to extract the sound waves. Now, once we have the sound waves, we can use ML models to identify the optimal amplitude such that it neither feels that one audio is overpowering the other, but the whole composition is pleasing to the ears. Next. Now, for generating the animated video, the main task would be to generate the body movements, and apart from that, some inanimate object movements like curtain movings or leaves falling. For body movements, we can use a baseline model of baseline movements curated from a database of pre-existing characters, and our model that was generated in the short term, that is the character generated, can adapt to these movements now. Next, in long term, we would like you to be able to interact with the movie itself. So wouldn't it be nice if you can actually decide how the character looks like or how the character speaks? For that, you can use something like iSpring Suite 8, which would allow you to use these avatars like you do in video games. Then we would also like to generate song lyrics, and the song lyrics should be coherent to the scene that is being talked about. The song lyrics, once generated, can be translated into actual music using tools like Jukebox. Now you have a whole movie generated from a novel, and which you can also interact with. For evaluating the system at different points, one technique that we discussed was summaries. For evaluating the summaries, one popular score being used is the Ruggie scores. Apart from that, for text-to-speech evaluation, certain machine learning-based model evaluation metrics are available, which can be used. However, ultimately, audience is the final judge that would decide the way our model or our system has been performing. So that's all from our side. Hope you like the idea. Thank you.
Thank you
Sir,
so much. Very interesting. Yeah, any questions?
within the 10 minutes deadline.
Thank you so much. I believe you are a great fan of Deepika, right?
Yes, sir.
Probably at least Saruk is also there, hopefully.
No, sir, Deepika only.
Deepika only. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. So next group, please share your screen. And meanwhile, any questions through the group, please ask.
Sir, could you please make me co-host?
Yeah, actually, wait a second. Okay, so I made you co-host. Please try. So meanwhile, Vibhu and probably Himanshi and others. So very interesting idea that you have presented. How about the feasibility you can see at least by some companies that you can think of?
So what we feel is like we can break down this task into various smaller tasks, and multiple companies can work on it. For example, for the video part, some companies like Adobe, which are already in the 3D illustration part, can start working on it. For some audio kind of part, companies like maybe Spotify can start working, and for generating the Script itself a good combination of researchers working in the domain of information retrieval and NLP, as well as some companies which can provide all the resources required for excessive computation would be required, like companies like maybe Google, etc., can be collaborated with.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. So next group, please start.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. This is group number 29, and the topic for our presentation is devising a recommendation tool for Twitter reach enhancement. So we all know that how important social media is nowadays in helping a person voice their opinions and concerns on the internet. And we also know for a fact that the content of our post or tweet is not the only deciding factor when it comes to deciding whether it will go viral or whether it will get the expected engagement or not. A lot of other factors such as hashtags, timing of the tweet, basic structure and framing of the content, and the relevant media that we attach, which includes web links, images, or videos, also come into play in deciding whether a tweet will go viral or not. So what we aim to do is to devise a tool which can take these factors into consideration and help a user modify their tweet accordingly so that it gains a good amount of engagement from the public. So we came up with this idea while discussing for our course project only. We are currently doing it on topic labeling, but initially we decided to make some sort of a hashtag generation system, but we thought it wouldn't be feasible. So the two papers mentioned in this slide are sort of try to tackle this problem, and we thought they would be good starting points for our idea. The first one is a hashtag recommendation system for Twitter data streams. The system uses an effective hashtag ranking method called hashtag frequency inverse hashtag ubiquity. This is similar to the TF-IDF scheme that we have studied in class, and this produced quite good results. But it hasn't gained much popularity yet, and we thought that this could be used in the idea that we're proposing. And the second one is microblog hashtag generation via encoding conversation context. When we read up more about this paper, we came to the conclusion that the ideas used in this paper are similar to those used in topic labeling. And we, while discussing, we also came to the conclusion that good topics don't always make for good hashtags. So keeping these things in mind and keeping these two papers as the base of our whole idea, we devise a tool which takes hashtags into consideration and also aims to provide relevant links which we can attach with our tweet, and also to suggest proper timings to post the tweet. So these features will now be discussed in the following slides, and I hand over to Rudraroop now.
All right, good morning. So as Akshat said, the app has three major functionalities. The first one is generating context sensitive hashtags. So hashtags obviously are important. They help Twitter organize the insanely huge amount of data that they have. And if you have the right hashtags in your post, then it helps Twitter facilitate better search, and it also helps them get the right tweets to the right people. So hashtag generation in itself is not a very new idea. So the reason we're doing this is because the current hashtag generation doesn't take context into consideration at all. The current publicly available hashtag generation systems, at least. So what they do basically is they blindly aim to increase engagement by giving you the most popular hashtags, say of this day or this week or whatever, even if it has nothing to do with the topic or the context of your tweet. So supposing you're presenting something, supposing you're tweeting about a recent fossil that was found, but the farmers' protests are the hot topic right now. The current hashtag generation apps would just give you a farmers protest hashtag, even though it doesn't really have anything to do with your tweet, and it'll reach the wrong audiences as a result. So we aim to bridge this gap by using context-sensitive hashtag generation. There are there's two methodologies that we were proposing. Either one could be good. So one method is, as Akshat had pointed out in the second paper, generating a hashtag list out of similar posts. So what we do is we use automatic topic labeling to analyze the draft of the tweet, and then we use these topic labels and plug them into Twitter's advanced search to find popular tweets which have the similar topic labels. Now, we rank the tweets that we get by seeing how many common topic labels they have and how popular they are as well. And we take the hashtags from the popular tweets that we find in the search, and we suggest those to the user. Now, how exactly do we do the topic labeling? Is through a sequence to sequence model, which is basically an encoder decoder model, an encoder decoder architecture. So it takes a sequence of terms as input and generates another sequence of terms to be used as labels. This is basically our course project as well. It's based on a very recent paper from SIG-IR. Okay, so the second approach now, next slide. Yeah, so the second approach is based on this modification of TF-IDF, which is hashtag frequency inverse hashtag ubiquity. So hashtag frequency component is the frequency with which a hashtag appears with a given term, and hashtag ubiquity basically says that if a certain hashtag is used with a narrow subset of terms, then it is more likely to give context rather than something which is used generally. So this is exactly like TF-IDF. This system is built on Hadoop. MapReduce algorithm is used to construct the two tables, which give us the TF and IDF values, which is the hashtag frequencies and the hashtag ubiquity values. And the approach is the same as in the paper, in the first paper that we mentioned, which is by Otsuka et al. But in this, the paper uses a static data set, but we intend to use a data set that a dynamic data set that takes all new tweets as they come in, and over a certain relevant period of time, our data set keeps changing. So yeah, I'll hand it over to Rahul now.
Hello. So the second feature that we have is having the best time to post the tweet. So what exactly is the need for tweeting at a good time? So suppose you have a tweet and you have worked really hard on it, but you post it at an odd time. So because of that, you notice that it gets very little engagement, and that is not what you want. So basically, if you had posted at a suitable time, more audience would have would have got the tweet on top of their feed, which would have created more likes, retweets, and comments, and therefore creating the maximum buzz. So what our feature will do is, so basically this process could be done manually by Twitter analytics and such, but one second, can you go to the previous slide? Yeah, so our aim will be to automate this process, and the user will have the option to automatically schedule the tweet, or to take the suggestion to post at a suitable time. Yeah, next. Yeah, so this is the overview of the steps involved in the process. So first, the tool will download the data for the past tweets of the user, and this will have parameters like impressions and engagement rate and such. Then when the user enters the tweet, it will extract keywords from it and find a particular topic by using the topic modeling methods. It will then analyze this past data, and it will get the tweets on that generated topic, and it will combine and find the most suitable time for posting, and then it will schedule that draft tweet for that suitable time. Next. Yeah, so this is just in more detail. So the first data set we'll collect is the user's own tweets from the last 28 days, and the parameters include impressions, engagement likes, retweets, and we'll be using topic modeling methods for generating the topic from the keywords. And the second data set will include the tweets from that generated topic. And then these two are combined. And then we'll find the most appropriate time. Yeah.
So kindly wrap it up in 1 minute. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, sir, I'll make it quick. So the next method you were using was suggesting topic relevant web links. Right, so you would want to do this as per a study conducted by Microsoft on the conversational aspects of retweeting, which found that almost 52% of viral retweets contained some kind of URL. Now, being able to back your claims on Twitter with trusted sources information gives you opinion a lot of weight, and also sways that of the reader and making them more confident in supporting your views with retweets. The novelty here would be finding and suggesting relevant tweets given the context of the text and the hashtags of your tweet. Right, and the user will of course have the option of including these links at their discretion. Next slide, please. So a basic approach will involve extracting context-dependent keywords and phrases from the tweet, or getting the embedding of the entire tweet using some pre-trained model like BERT. Then one could use similarity measures to recommend links from tweets that have been posted by other users, right? Or one could use some third-party search engines to obtain relevant weblinks from the internet and suggest those. Next slide. Now, as for the feasibility, considering that basic models for all individual components do exist, one could work out a system, including all these features in a couple of years. However, with regards to the first feature, the context-generated hashtags, since we were using dynamic Twitter data to constantly update the hashtag generation model, it could require a lot more research and development and perhaps more computation. So keeping that in mind, we believe that this system could be feasible within the next 5 years, definitely. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
So thank you. So in the interest of time, so Tarun, please share your screen and present. And any questions, please ask in the chat. Thanks.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. We are group 19, and today we are presenting about context-aware data enrichment at ingestion time. And this is our team, like myself, Jeshwant, Tarun, Venkatesh, and Ashish. Tarun, go on to next slide. Yeah, in this digital world, like every day a large amount of data is generated. One of the report by Domo says like 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is generating per day. With this large amount of data, both challenges and opportunities will be high. And one of the main challenges is deducing the insights from this large amount of data. And according to the main issue with machine learning development life cycle is an 80-20 rule, which says that 80% of the time and effort we are keeping on data curation, data cleaning, and data preparation. And there are methods like AutoML to mitigate this, but they are up to some extent depending on the domain and problem statement. And here we are assuming that the main issue is with data curation. Data curation is like organizing an integration of collected data from various resources. Like for instance, in an industry, the required data for a use case may be split across with multiple line of businesses. And Tarun, go to next slide, please. So even we can assume like even when after the development of a model, still the data scientists will keep on figuring about certain features which might reduce the model's risk. And we are proposing a system like if the raw data had been enriched with relevant data before persisting it helps in reducing the above problem. And Tarun, go to next slide. And our vision, we are proposing a system which is context aware to address the above problem by rendering actionable data at the time of ingestion rather than at later stages. and the system is like while data is ingested, the system is equipped with some historical data and context of data usage in existing workloads, and the system must infer the context of usage of ingested data and apply appropriate operations to render actionable data. And we are also aiming that system will able to adapt the changes in existing data and context of data usage in the workloads. Tarun, go on with the next slide.
Thanks, Jashwant. So yeah, so we all have posted our opinions on social media, right? Like whenever we have any little issue. So we are all called keyboard warriors. So I just like to give some examples from that. It's most relatable. So you would have tweeted to some official government office by tagging them, and would have seen a lot of screenshots that claims that they have responded immediately. Like say you had an issue with the IRCTC or something like that. But on the surface level, it looks like a very quick response on Twitter, but the percentage of turnout is really, really less. So that is what we are trying to control from this. So there are other examples like you could have uncollected waste, open drainage, or damaged electric poles. A lot of issues could crop up. So there was one of examples in Tamil Nadu where a survey was taken from the common people about the problems they are facing, and that was collected over forms. But still, the issue is that though we have the data, it's very hard to make a good correlation from them. We need a higher level of a profiling of the data so that we can turn them into actionable points. So let's take one such example where you're trying to collect the amount of waste generated from a particular locality, but until you have the relevant information that can convert, let's say the kind of waste generated and from which streets the amount of waste is generated and the kind of recyclers who are present at each location, so that you can map the waste generation to the recycling plant. So these are the kind of actionable items that you require so that you can make use of the data appropriately. So this gap is what we are trying to fill. So we all know that the kind of data, amount of data which is generated, and we also have facilities to implement them, but we just lack the gap to basically infer it appropriately. So this is our motivation to fill that gap. I would like to ask Venkatesh to explain the architecture that we implement.
Yeah, so my friend Jashwan and Tarun basically told our motivation is to basically enrich data at ingestion time. So this diagram actually summarizes what we are trying to achieve and also the technical part. So basically, like as you can see here, based on the motivation gave Tarun, like we have tweets which may just be images without any context of potholes, and you could have textual tweets or surveys or written complaints, and you have a pipeline. It could be a Kafka topic or it could be anything that is ingesting this data. So this core component, which is like right now a black box, which we'll expand further, is basically like going to contextualize the data usage in existing workloads. And basically like it is going to apply a suitable, it is going to optimally decide the set of operators to apply to the stream of data to basically make the best out of it. So operators could be very simple as tokenization or normalization to complex operators like even OCR, right, which are like self-contained applications in themselves. They can be operators too. So they could be like hundreds of operators you could apply on a stream of data. So basically what we are aiming to do is like when new data comes in, basically like or when a new workload comes in, basically like you see which workload basically uses this stream of data or would benefit from the stream of data, and then you basically like map it to that workload, and then you see what are the operators that have been already applied to that workload if there is historical data. If not, we'll see how to collect it, like we'll expand on that. And then basically we do feature selection to like basically decide which operators to apply. And then finally, like we sort of use Bayesian optimization to even select among those operators the correct sequence of operators and the correct set of operators to optimize the gain. So here the metric could be like the accuracy in the existing workloads, it should not reduce. And there could also be like multiple objectives like reduce time, because that's why we are using Bayesian optimization, because it's sample efficient. Tarun, next. Tarun. Yeah. So basically like this is the existing work which we have come across, and we have also tried a few experiments on this. So basically like the existing work is like an Asterix DB, which is like a whole new database designed to enrich data at time of ingestion. So basically these are just some terminologies where a dataverse corresponds to a database in our RDBMS world. and data sets correspond to tables. So the language it's written is in SQL++. So basically it has something called feeds where you can attach custom programs and basically specify what you want to do at the time of ingestion. But the problem is, so we tried an experiment, we figured out that even to do a simple thing like tokenization or sentiment analysis, we had to like write like a lot of user defined functions, and we had to define the order in which to apply. Tarun, next slide. So this is an example. Yeah. So basically, again, coming back to our system, this is what we are trying to automate, basically deciding the optimal set of operators to. Yeah, next slide. So yeah, I would just like to like briefly describe Bayesian optimization. You can think of it as like digging for gold in like a very huge land. So let's say like someone says our campus has like some gold, right? So basically you can't start digging in every area. You have to like optimize it. So basically you sample points where you think there's a high chance of gold being there. And then you basically do exploration versus exploitation. That's what Bayesian optimization does. It has some, so basically in Bayesian optimization, the assumption is you don't know the true function, and it is very costly to basically call this function and get the value. So you want to like decide which points are optimal and then call the function with this data and then get the result and retrain your model. So this is the algorithm. So basically like you have a surrogate function. Surrogate is Gaussian process in this case, which sort of like provides a distribution and uncertainty estimates so that you can decide where to sample based on uncertainty estimate. So you sample points and then you pass it to acquisition function, which tells you whether the current sample points value is greater than the previous value. If so, you add it to your Gaussian process model, retrain it, and then you rinse and repeat till convergence. Yeah, next slide. So now we were talking about contextualization, right? Right now, I mean, you could just apply Bayesian optimization to all the operators. Let's say you have 400 operators like OCR and all. You could just apply it on the incoming stream of data, run Bayesian optimization for 40 iterations, but you're not taking the context of the workload into account. So we propose like sort of sample efficient method to collect like some data by trying it with different configurations. So we sort of like resort to active learning. So primary difference between active learning and BO is that in active learning, you basically get a distribution of, optimal parameters. In BO, you get like a single optimal configuration. So that is the aim. So here, like we sort of resort to batch mode active learning, where we sort of like use the set of operators, and then basically like we apply this operators and get the metrics. And those operators, so we sort of use a linear model to like predict the metrics of a particular workload. It could be accuracy, it could be anything. And basically like if it changes the model's parameters a lot, basically the gradients, then we add this sample to the we add this to the sample as an optimal sample. So basically our inputs are flag operators and our output is the metric. So basically, since we don't know the true value for a new unlabeled sample, we sort of use bootstrapping to approximate. And this is what is shown here in this form. Yeah, Tarun, next slide. So yeah, I hand over to you, Ashish, to basically talk about the future.
Yeah, hey, good morning, guys. I'll be discussing about the future roadmap. So basically, rolling out a scale enterprise in this case will require time within 3 to 5 years. This can be done successfully. But right now we have assumed the operators are defined by users, and learner only helps in applying them in an optimal way. So a good option can be if new operators can be learned by the system itself. That too with less effort. So basically meta learning shows us the way for this, which is learning to learn. So this may take 10 to 15 years as the operators are and workloads are dynamic now. So next slide, please. So some of the examples of meta learning that I can share is suppose a game bot is able to quickly master a new game. A classifier trained on a non-cat images can tell whether a given image contains a cat after seeing a handful of cat pictures. So meta learning can help the system to learn new operations apart from the existing ones like captioning the imaging and OCR. This can be done by domain randomization when new operators are formed by slightly perturbing existing operators on the data. For example, OCR can be enhanced to event segmentation or region identification. And a meta learner in this case will involve a learner that learns to optimize each operator and workload to achieve maximum performance. So this was about meta learning, and that's all we have for you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone, since we are running out of time. And so thank you so much everyone. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye. Any questions from audience in case they want to ask? Okay, thanks. Bye.